Hi everyone, I'm Jen White and I'm an adjunct professor with Vista and also an immigration attorney. And I want to talk to you a little bit about immigration court and some of the things that make it unique. So first of all, we know that in our system of government we have three branches. We have the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive branch. So most courts you would find yourself in across the US fall under the judiciary. So in those courts, you'll see a judge or a panel of judges independently decide cases on the basis of case law, statutes, regulations, etc. While immigration court is housed within the Department of Justice, which is part of the executive branch. So it's different, it's more politicized in nature. It's subject to massive policy changes, particularly when we see a change in administration, because the president, as the head of the executive, has so much power over immigration and the way it's implemented and enforced, particularly in the context of immigration court. So immigration court also tends to be a bit less formal than other courts you could find yourself in. For example, say you're a criminal defense attorney and you're in court representing your client accused of a crime. Every single time you address the judge in that courtroom, you would stand up. It's just a formality, a means of showing respect. Well, in immigration court, in most cases, you remain seated when you talk to the judge. So the typical procedure you would see is that when the immigration judge enters the room, you stand up to show respect, and then you sit down when that judge sits down. And then thereafter, you remain seated when you talk to the judge. So this is nice, in my opinion. I appreciate that immigration court is a bit less formal. Related to that, immigration court is kind of a cut-to-the-chase environment. There are incredible backlogs facing every immigration court in the country, so I suspect that that's part of the cut-to-the-chase environment. I think it's also related to the fact that immigration court is an executive agency and not a judiciary court. So it's helpful to know that before you walk into court, that you're expected to give answers quickly. You're expected to give good, concise answers to questions. Another note is that the federal rules of evidence don't apply in a strict way in immigration court. So we'll get into this in greater detail in Module 3. But it's helpful to know that you can take some liberties as an advocate because you're not bound by these rules that apply strictly in other courts across the country. So you know in Vista by now that we're really practical. We want to expose you to what you really need to know to be successful in representing your future clients. And that's why we expose you to the Immigration Court Practice Manual, because when you walk into court, when you're representing a client, judges will expect that you're complying with that manual. So in a nutshell, that manual covers all of the procedural rules that you're bound by as an advocate in immigration court. So you want to make sure that you're taking those assignments seriously because it will really benefit you if you start to internalize and memorize bits of that manual so that you know what to look up later on when you're practicing. So the last note I want to leave you with is an analogy that kind of helps me embrace my role as an advocate in immigration court. So I actually see my role as similar to how I see my role in my private life when I'm hosting a dinner. So when I'm hosting, I take the initiative to invite everyone to come over, to tell them what to bring, to plan all the logistical details. And then when they actually come over for dinner, I introduce everyone to each other, make sure that they're comfortable, and they of course ask me where things are located, like the restroom, the utensils, etc. So that role is similar to the role in immigration court because you really are, as the advocate for the immigrant or the respondent, you really are kind of taking the reins. And I mention this because it's a bit counterintuitive. When I first started practicing immigration law, I incorrectly assumed that when I walked into court, the judge would be really familiar with my case, that I would kind of be answering questions, like at the master calendar hearing, for example, that I wouldn't necessarily need to take charge as much. Well, as I said, I was wrong. As the advocate for the respondent, remember, you and your client are facing the burden of proof. You and your client are situated to understand the case, and really you in particular understand the legal case better than anyone else in that courtroom. So embrace that role. Know that you will have to do a lot of directing. The onus is on you to explain your client's needs. For example, say your client speaks Spanish, but they only learn Spanish later on in life because they're from an area in Guatemala, say, where they grew up speaking an indigenous language. So they have a unique accent, right? So when you're in court, you know this about your client. You know that they have a unique Spanish accent. So the onus is on you if you suspect an error in interpretation that you note that for the record. You verbalize it. Say, Your Honor, I think there's a translation issue happening, and deal with the issue as you see fit. So embrace that role. Embrace the role of director or host. Remember that you cannot expect that the judge or your opposing counsel has either have read the full record or are fully familiar with your case. Remember, again, the backlogs facing the immigration system. The judge might have heard a case the day before that's very similar to your case. So of course they're going to conflate some of the facts. So the onus is really on you to highlight the good things in the record. For example, say you filed a phenomenal psychological evaluation. You should definitely highlight that when you're in trial. Say it verbally, highlight to it, just quote to it directly. Embrace that role of being a host and a director and of noting what's important. And in doing all of that, you'll find that your client's voice is heard in a way that's much richer than if you take more of a back seat. So I hope you'll embrace that role, and best of luck in immigration court.